Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights. Thanks, Topps Panini Upper Deck. Thanks, Heritage Auctions and Huggins & Scott Auctions. Thanks, Mike Stadium Sports Cards and Burbank Sports Cards. And thanks, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, as well as ComC.com. Got a good question from Brad Askew, who's been on. He's the Eddie Murray guy, in a couple episodes, and had some great back and forth. And he mentioned that in responding to the collection breakdown math episode, and I'll just quote from him. It seems kind of harsh. He says, "I know from your many comments that you hate plastic sheets. I was a little surprised to hear you say that you would also pull cards out of top loaders and penny sleeves." And then he goes on to say some other nice things too. So my skin is not so thin. Actually, Brad and others, I do not hate plastic sheets. Actually, I do hate plastic sheets that were made in the 70s and the 80s. The early plastic sheets were made out of the wrong stuff. In fact, I actually had a lawsuit against my company for disparaging the fact that the early plastic sheets were not safe. And we didn't lose the lawsuit, but on the other hand, you got to pay the attorneys. So it was pretty miserable. You'd think truth would be a defense, but getting to the courtroom is a circuitous path sometimes. So I don't hate plastic sheets, and I do take your point that it's a lot easier, especially to show off some cards. But I really have too many cards to put them in plastic sheets, so that's the main thing. And so I keep them in shoe boxes or monster boxes, and kind of alphabetically by player, so I can get them. And those cards, Brad, I do keep in penny sleeves. I no longer put them in top loaders or semi-rigids or card savers. I basically, but I'm not jostling them around. I mean, if I bring it out, they're not knocking around. I'm not taking them anywhere. So, not a big problem for me. When I do a player lot on eBay or send cards to ComC, I also don't put penny sleeves on those in most cases, because it just takes up room, and I'm going to pack them reasonably snugly. And then the other thing is, I don't really, of the cards that are above a certain value, I'm generally sending them to BGS. And so I've got a fair number of cards that are BGS, and they're heavy. They take up a lot of room, but they're super secure. So I think you have getting this vision that I had these very expensive cards just knocking around in a shoebox, and they're either graded if they're expensive, and if they're not, I just kind of have them in a sleeve and stacked in there where they're not going to, like I say, not going to knock around. Screw downs. You basically talked about screw downs, and I was also saying I didn't like unscrewing screw downs, and they're generally kind of more expensive. They're not as reusable, and I have actually had a bad experience with screw downs, or screwed down too tightly. And when I unscrewed them down, I had some surface loss, which is just freaked me out. So I thought, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. And again, I probably should have put a penny sleeve on and done it, but I wasn't the one. These were screw downs from somebody else, so I don't really do it. The other issue that I'm going to deal with, that's not today, because I really want to just respond to Brad's question about how I, my biases, or how I keep and display my collection. Actually, I realize, Brad, you're probably more right than wrong. I remember I had a friend of, actually, he's a grandson of one of my friends, but I know the dad too. And brought his 11 or 12-year-old son over, and his favorite player, and he wanted to see, his favorite player was Troy Aikman. And so I thought, okay, well, you want to see the Troy Aikman card. And the problem was, if I would have had him in plastic sheets, he would have sat there and leisurely looked and flipped the pages. But I had him in a box, and it was like a shoebox, and it was full of Troy Aikmans. And just leafing through them one at a time, he got impatient. He got freaked out. He got overwhelmed. And so I think you're right. For that purpose, if I really were going to show somebody all these different Troy Aikman cards, having them in a Troy Aikman album. The problem is Troy's Troy's, a Dallas mainstay, but I'd have to have an album for Elway and Marino and Favre and every other quarterback from the 90s. So I wouldn't have to, but I probably would. So again, nice to be able to show people your cards. And I admit there's a place for plastic sheets. And I think it's too late for me, Brad. I think I'm not a plastic sheet guy. So I'll do another episode about what happens to the where to use plastic sheets and use top loaders and use penny sleeves and guard savers go when they're not dead, but they're old age. So again, thanks listeners. Be back again tomorrow.